everyone, Adam here from Hunting Systems. This is the fourth and final video of the video series on the physics of bow hunting. In this video we're going to be covering some of the takeaways and perhaps how we would go about implementing some of the science that we've learnt about over the last few videos into our bow hunting setups. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is the results again, the results of the testing that we did, and everything that we've covered in the way of learning about momentum and kinetic energy. The results of the tests that I did, showed that kinetic energy is a better formula at predicting the outcomes of archery collisions. So we did a test, we did the maths to work out momentum. The proposed momentum showed that the heavier arrow of the two had a greater momentum, but the greater momentum didn't correlate with the greater penetration, and the greater kinetic energy did. So when we applied our kinetic energy science to the test, it correlated with what we were seeing in the target. So it's through that we can say that kinetic energy, or the formulas that are involved with calculating the kinetic energy of our arrows, better correlate with the performance that we're going to get out of them penetration-wise. Is the kinetic energy formula better for all bows or just compound bows? I would argue that it doesn't matter. In terms of the kinetic energy formula, the bow simply serves as a velocity output. So it's a launching platform. It doesn't matter whether it's in a bow or you throw it. So long as it's, well, it kind of does, because throwing it would be sort of hard to measure and calculate. But with a bow, we can calculate the feet per second of an arrow leaving the bow with the calculators that I've shown you guys. And I would say that you can apply that science to any bow. So whether it's a trad bow or a compound bow, so long as you can calculate the projected feet per second of your arrow out of the bow, it doesn't really matter what type of bow it is. You're still going to be able to use the science to calculate kinetic energy, or the expected kinetic energy out of your bow and arrow combination. To help you guys understand how kinetic energy works in our arrows, and what manipulating the kinetic energy of our arrows will do for us, I want to do a little thought experiment. So I want us to pretend that we've already bought a bow, and we didn't know any of this stuff. We just have the bow that we've got, whether it's a trad bow or a compound bow, a heavy compound bow or a light compound bow, it doesn't matter. This is essentially, I'm going to try and replicate how everyone out there watching this might go about making their first steps into perhaps arrow selection using kinetic energy and everything that we've learned so far. It's a pretty simple process. I've done this for all of my gear, and in selecting my arrows over the years and trying to work out which ones are the best ones to use for my personal bow. As I said at the start of the series, everyone's bow is different. This is just a method that I've found and our testing has shown to be accurate in selecting our gear and trying to tune. When I say tune, I mean selecting which arrows we're going to fire out of our launching platform. And this science helps us to select the best possible arrow for our launching platform, being our bow. So I want to pretend that we've bought our bow. What's the first thing that we're going to do? Well, we need to go out there and try and work out what arrows are on the market, and what style we're going to shoot. We're going to shoot micro diameter, or we're going to shoot a standard diameter shaft. There's lots of different things that we can pick. But in terms of how heavy we want our arrows to be, we can use the kinetic energy calculator and the arrow speed calculators to help us pick that. So the first thing I want to say is that the way arrow mass should be approached here is that it's sort of like a storage tank. arrow mass operates like a storage tank, soaking up the energy that our bows put out, specifically kinetic energy. So it operates a little bit, it's not just like a fuel tank though. Our arrows in the way of arrow mass sort of work like the dipstick on a car. Anyone out there who's mechanically minded will understand what I'm saying when if you put too much oil past the fill level on a dipstick, it's actually detrimental to the engine. And just in the same way, if you don't put enough in and there's not enough oil, that's also detrimental to the engine. When it comes to arrow mass, it works in the same way. Too much storage or too much arrow mass is detrimental to the system, and not enough arrow mass is also detrimental to the system. And it's up to us to try and find the sweet spot, or the fill line, as I like to put it, on our arrow mass dipstick. Just like some little sort of like mathematics to have in your head to try and get your head around this. If we have too much mass for the bow, everything's in relation to the bow, the launching platform. If we have too much mass for the bow, the arrow stores too much energy from the bow, and there's not enough left over for velocity. Does that make sense? So the arrow receives, the bow puts out a set amount of kinetic energy, right? We can work that out with the IBO specs of our bows. And the amount of poundage that we've applied to them. So whether you've got your limbs turned all the way up, or maybe you've just got a set amount if it's your trad bow. At full draw, you would have the most amount of poundage that the limbs can provide you. So if the arrows are too heavy, they'll soak up all of that kinetic energy that the bow is going to transfer into the arrow, and there won't be enough left over for velocity. So the arrow is going to carry kinetic energy with it, but it also needs velocity to get it to where it's going, to give it its feet per second, right? And if it's soaking up too much of that energy, it doesn't have enough left over in the way of velocity. And that's going to result in low KE. So you could say that too much mass for the bow equals too much stored energy, which equals low KE. Likewise, if there's not enough arrow mass, we have not enough storage in the arrow, so it has not enough storage, and basically all of the energy that our bows are putting out has to go somewhere. And if there's no storage or not enough storage in the arrow, or it doesn't have enough mass, what happens is, sure, some of the leftovers get converted into velocity, and if it's a light arrow, if it's too light, it has quite a lot of velocity. But there's always still going to be, if it's too light for the bow, there's going to be some left over. And that remaining leftover energy in the bow is catastrophic. So basically, when it can't get put into the arrow, it goes back into the bow limbs. And that's when you get things like splintered limbs. So just like the dipstick on a car, if it's too much mass or not enough, it's not good for the overall system. We want it right on the fill line. If it's low, like I said, you'll get the arrow mass is low. If it's too low, you'll get quite a lot of velocity. You'll have a very fast arrow, but you'll actually also get low kinetic energy as well. So I don't know if you guys remember in the last film I was talking about an instance where somebody might get hold of these formulas, these kinetic energy formulas, and try to game the system by removing all of their arrow weight and turning their bows way up, thinking that they're going to get heaps and heaps of kinetic energy. Well, it doesn't work that way either. If the arrows are too heavy, it also has low kinetic energy, and also if the arrows are too light, they'll also have low kinetic energy. So what I'm going to do is a little demonstration, a quick demonstration. This is what I do whenever I'm selecting my arrows for a new bow, is I set up a card and I try to find the fill line with prospective arrow weights. So I'll take you guys over to the desk and show you how I do that. Righto, so what I've got over here is a piece of paper here with a bunch of prospective arrow weights on them, and I've just basically done it in 50 grain increments. So we've got a 300 grain arrow, a 350 grain arrow, a 400 grain arrow, 450, 500, 550, right? And essentially what we're going to do is, this is set up for my bow, my personal bow, and you guys will have to do the same thing for your personal bows as well. So you'll have different IBO specs than mine. So that means with your bows set at whatever output they are, using your bow scales and the calculators I showed you in the last video, you'll be able to compile a document like this accurate to your bow setup, right? So what we need is to find first, and I've already gone ahead and done that, and found the projected feet per second out of my bow with a 300 grain arrow, 350, 400, 450, 500, 550. So I've written the prospective speeds that we're expecting to get out of our bows, my bow, for those arrow weights, right? And then what I would do is set up my calculator and then systematically go through each bow, writing out the projected kinetic energy, or the expected kinetic energy out of that bow and arrow combination for all of them, and then I would find the perfect arrow weight for my bow. So we'll start with the 300, and we'll just go, 300 grains with the velocity. So I'm just going to rapid fire this one out there. 330 grains, and we get 72.56. 72.56. Then we go 350 with the velocity 313. 313. So just checking that, 350 and 313 feet per second, we get 76.16. 76.16. 400 and 297 feet per second. So that's my current arrow setup, is the 400 grain arrows, and 297 feet per second. Yep, we get 38.37. No, 78.37, sorry. 37. Yep. 450 and 280 feet per second. 78.36. 78.36. 500. 263. 263. 76.81. And the last one, 550, was 247 feet per second, and it was 550 grains, 74.53. 0.53. So if we have a look here, we want the most amount of kinetic energy. So if it goes, and this reinforces what I was saying before with the dipstick line, we don't want to just go infinitely less mass, because as you can see here, it's at 78.37, and then as we actually reduce our arrow mass, we're actually getting less kinetic energy as we go down. It's going down to 76, then 72, the lighter the arrow gets, and then from 400 onwards. So 400 and 450 are basically the same. So I could, and I have attempted to do this before, I'm currently actually trying to get that sorted out at the moment, is to step my arrows up to 450. I'm just wanting to have a play around with them, because there's absolutely bugger all difference. As you can see, it's 0.01 of a difference kinetic energy wise between a 400 grain and a 450 grain arrow. But as I increase mass again, you can see that it starts to dip down. So as I go to a 500 grain arrow, it starts going back down to 76.81 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. And down to 550, it also drops down to 74.53. So the best arrow bow combination that we had was the 400 grain arrow, and that's at 78.37 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Also, just quickly, I'll throw in here that these values down the side here simply state whether the arrow is above or below the IBO specs. So the IBO of my bow is found out using a from the shop. So the IBO specs is found out using a 350 grain arrow. So that is at IBO, and that is below IBO specs. So you certainly wouldn't be using a 300 grain arrow anyway. I just put that one in there to show that if you keep reducing the arrow weight, you'll actually get a detrimental effect on your kinetic energy. And yeah, 400 grain is simply 50 grains heavier than the IBO. So 50 grains heavier than what they said. So at the IBO spec, that one actually didn't have the best kinetic energy anyway. 400 grains actually has the best kinetic energy. So yeah, the arrow weight that they're using to get their IBO specs actually doesn't have the most kinetic energy for the bow, but then again, the stores aren't worried about penetration, so we are. So we'd definitely be going for the 400 or the 450, whichever one. Cool, so that was how we set up our document that helps us to find the fill line of our arrows. And yeah, as I discussed, you just set yourself out a piece of paper like this with the arrow range that you're considering purchasing. So that can be even bigger than this if you want to go all the way to maybe 600-700 grains and have a play with that. But that's essentially how I do it every time, is I just sort of set out each arrow in increments of 50, and then try to find the best arrow for my bow setup. And so yeah, you just sort of put down the velocity and kinetic energy for each arrow, and then use your speed calculator to work out the speeds of all of those arrows first, and then chuck them in the kinetic energy calculator. The next question that I wanted to cover is how does kinetic energy limit what we can hunt? So obviously, with whichever setup you choose, whichever bow you end up with, and whichever arrow you deem to best suit that bow, you're obviously going to be wanting to get as much kinetic energy as possible if you're intending to hunt with it. The most kinetic energy that you can get out of your setup comfortably, sometimes the limitation may be how much you can comfortably pull back, or how high your bow poundage will be, how much money you want to spend on your bow. Those sorts of things will all come into it in terms of how much kinetic energy you can actually end up yielding from your bow and arrow system, and that will limit what you can and can't hunt. The good news is today, archery equipment is fantastic. So most high-end bows are generating enough kinetic energy enough velocity out of the bows to enable you to shoot an arrow that will pretty much kill anything up to and including a buffalo, and probably heavier as well. How can we work that out? Well, again, I've got another calculator here, but you can just go onto Google, and there's swathes of information out there on how much kinetic energy hunters have seen to effectively kill animals. So essentially, it's basically a trial and error thing with hunters all over the planet, and I'm guessing that they've put together information or compiled information, and we end up with a bunch of data that's out there in the internet, and essentially you can just Google how much kinetic energy do I need to kill a deer, or what type of deer, or how big a deer, a red deer, any species of deer, any species of pig, any species of goat. There's heaps and heaps of information out there in the way of how much kinetic energy do I need to kill things. But at a basic level, if you just Google it, it will tell you. AI will sort of spit out an answer for you. But also there's another calculator, another kinetic energy calculator from Victory Arrows. So that's actually an arrow manufacturer. They actually have come out here and said what foot-pounds per second you would want to kill certain species of animals. And I'll just let you know that these are pretty much across the board with all of the other examples that I've seen on the internet. It's saying here that for big game, Cape buffalo, grizzly bears, there's no grizzly bears in Australia, but Cape buffalo, you're looking at 65 plus foot-pounds for those animals. And as you can see on my my paperwork here, I've got above that for literally every single arrow type. So I've got more than enough kinetic energy to take down the biggest animals on the planet that we would go and hunt. I don't know, save a rhinoceros or something like that, or an elephant. I don't really have any desire to go and hunt those sorts of animals, but I would certainly be trying to find some information out there as to how much kinetic energy I would need to kill them if I was intending to do that, because obviously I can't find any information on those animals with just general AI asking as how much kinetic energy do I need to kill them. It doesn't pop up normally. I've never really asked, to be honest with you. But large game like elk, black bear and boars, so it's saying pigs, you'd need 42 to 65 foot-pounds to kill those or to penetrate into those animals. Medium game animals, you're looking at 25 to 41, so that's just your general deer. So you don't really need that much energy, kinetic energy to kill deers. But in Australia, if you're going to want to set your bow up, you're probably going to be wanting to address the likelihood of shooting a pig, at least, and that would mean that you'd need at least 42 foot-pounds. And 42 to 65 being the range for boars. So I'll put this calculator on the video as well, so you guys have access to it. But I would just say go out onto Google and do your research to try and find out how much kinetic energy you need. And if you're using like I said before, if you're using a modern compound bow, it's not really that important unless you're not shooting high poundage. The 60, 70 pound mark, you're definitely going to have enough to shoot those animals. It's more for people that are shooting lower poundage bows, trad bows. You're really going to start wanting to do your maths, crunch your maths, and see as to whether or not you've got more than enough to hunt those animals. Small game as well is roughly 25 foot-pounds. So, like I said, this is only really going to matter to someone who's planning to go out there and shoot these things with a stick bow, or very light, like maybe they're a kid. You've got a kid who's wanting to shoot like a youth bow or something like that. You can run these same equations or do the same math on their bow to see whether or not it's going to be happy days when you do, or they do actually hit a small animal. But generally speaking, most compound bows are performing above and beyond what they need to in terms of yielding enough velocity to shoot an arrow, a reasonably weighted arrow, at a critter to give it the most kinetic energy it needs to penetrate that animal. So again, you can mess that system right up by not selecting the correct arrows. If you don't select the correct arrows using the formulas, then essentially you may not be getting that kinetic energy that would be expected out of your bows. And this is what I see happening a lot, particularly in Australia, is people not doing the maths and ruining what would be a fantastic bow arrow combination by not selecting the correct arrows for it. And they haven't done any maths. They've just sort of listened to what other people have said who probably haven't done the maths either. And then, basically everyone's making assumptions based on no maths. So I'm putting the maths out there so that everybody can use it. And hopefully you get more success by using your brain. We'll use our brains, and then we'll have the best bow and arrow combinations to kill the animals that we want to hunt. So the next question is, how does kinetic energy influence broadhead performance? So this is another thing that can really stuff all of that up. So you buy your bow, you can potentially not buy the right arrows for the bow and not get the kinetic energy that you should get out of your bow and arrow combination. Then you can buy a poor broadhead choice and ruin it even further. So I just want to get this out of the way straight away when it comes to broadhead selection. That's a mechanical broadhead. I shoot mechanical broadheads. By no means am I saying that if you're using kinetic energy, then you definitely would want to shoot mechanical broadheads, because it's all about velocity and it's all about big wound channels and all this kind of crap. No, kinetic energy is basically like the end result of all of this maths, and this is how much kinetic energy you have to kill an animal with. If you go and put a big broadhead like that on the end of your arrow, it's only got that much kinetic energy to play with, and depending on what you're hunting, right, that will depend on what broadhead you stick on there. Noting that this is going to apply that much more resistance to your setup, you're going to need surplus kinetic energy. So if I didn't have surplus kinetic energy than what I know I need, there is no way that I would be choosing to shoot one of these, because it's the resistance that matters in terms of soaking up kinetic energy and not having enough kinetic energy left over to penetrate the animal, to get a full pass through on an animal. You want more than enough kinetic energy than you need to shoot the animal in question, right? So if we go back to this calculator here, or more accurately, the values that we have associated with the target species that we're wanting to hunt. If I was to say, well, I want to shoot a boar, I want to shoot a pig, but I want to shoot a pig with a mechanical broadhead, right? You're going to want a lot more than 65 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, because when it hits the animal, if you've only got just enough kinetic energy that this tells you need to penetrate the animal, then this thing might soak up all of the kinetic energy that you have in just forcing this broadhead into them. And you may not have enough leftover kinetic energy to get your arrow through the animal, right? So you need more kinetic energy if you're going to go and throw handicaps on your bow and arrow system like this thing. These do get like a huge wound. It cuts the animal open bigger, right? More deformation of the target. If you wanted to get technical with the last few videos, that would be essentially what I'm trying to achieve, is more deformation of the target. And if I want more deformation of the target, I need more kinetic energy to get it happening. So my bow is 65 foot-pounds plus. If my bow is putting out almost 80, so 78.37 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, that's more than this is telling me that I need for a Cape buffalo. But I wouldn't be shooting one of these through a Cape buffalo, right? Because it's going to handicap the amount of kinetic energy that I've got. And probably, you know, I would want far more than what my bow's putting out. To be able to shoot this, which I just don't think it's a good choice for something that's heavy duty like a Cape buffalo, I would be shooting something that is sleeker, that's going to give me less resistance, right? Particularly through those heavier set animals, right? But a pig, so long as I've got excess kinetic energy, like kinetic energy for days, then it should work, and it does work, because I've shot plenty of pigs with these things through the shoulders, but that's only because I've optimized my bow and arrow combination to have excess kinetic energy. I've got far more kinetic energy than anyone online tells me I need to shoot a pig, so I have utmost confidence that my system's as good as it's going to get to address a pig. But I would not be using this system on anything bigger than that, because I would need to have surplus again. So essentially, yeah, that's how kinetic energy is influenced, or broadhead selection is influenced by kinetic energy. If you have more than enough kinetic energy to hunt your target species, if you've got heaps left over, then you can afford to try things that are a little bit more resistance laden, like an expandable broadhead or something like that. It's going to give you a bit of a better blood trail. On a deer, these things are fantastic. I think that only had, yeah, so this says that you only need a maximum of 41 foot-pounds of kinetic energy to kill a deer, and I've got double that. So these things work fantastic on deer. I've never had any dramas with my mechanical broadheads, but if you're at all concerned, you can go with a fixed blade. But yeah, just know that you've probably got more kinetic energy than you'll ever need. If you're running a modern compound bow that's shooting 70, even 60 pounds, you've got more kinetic energy in there than you'd ever need to get any broadhead through a deer in Australia. That brings an end to the video series on the physics of bow hunting. Yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I hope someone out there somewhere has a little bit more confidence when it comes to selecting the right arrows for their bows. If you guys have any questions regarding this video, just throw it up in the comment section under the video. Alternatively, you can get hold of me through Instagram. You just drop us a message on Instagram. It's just @EsauHuntingSystems, or you can leave us a message through the website, which is esauhuntingsystems.com.au. I'll see you guys later, and happy hunting.